Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. We are grateful to Fieldstone Memory Care of Bainbridge Island, which sponsors these programs Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Fieldstone is offering innovative and compassionate care, and they are accepting residents. And if you'd like to take a tour of their beautifully appointed apartments on Rolling Bay today, write down this phone number, 360-689-4314. Also, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting today on the ancestral homeland of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Suquamish people, the people of the clear salt water. And we are grateful for their hospitality, and we hope to earn it. And Anne Lovejoy is going to introduce our speaker today, who is Barbara Lawrence. So Anne, please do so. You need to unmute.
Right? I have to speak over my grandchildren. Thank you, Barbara, for coming again. You're one of our very popular presenters. We love your programs. Barbara Lawrence is outreach educator and specialist for the Suquamish Tribe. She's an incredible historian and a fabulous certified storyteller. And every program you've ever done, Barbara, just has this haunting quality of living on. It's amazing. You are so skillful, and we appreciate very much your glimpses into the life of the Suquamish people, our nearest neighbors, which we really want to appreciate, and we really want to get to know the tribe a lot better so we can be better neighbors in turn. So today you're going to talk to us about Suquamish New Year, right?
Seasonal rounds and
great,
and Native New Year's included. Thank you, Reed. Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Bainbridge Island Senior Center, for creating this space for us to get to know each other better. So Reed, if you want to start the slideshow or PowerPoint. So I titled it Suquamish Tribal Seasonal Knowledge, and I was able to find these beautiful images that from the lands, the water, the edge of the water, the tidelands, and towards up towards the mountains, all the different amazing things that the Creator gave us as amazing gifts for food, clothing, and shelter here in this area of the world. Next slide. So I've placed a map towards the beginning and at the end of this presentation. We created this map recently. It shows the locations of Suquamish villages and campsites. There are undoubtedly more village and campsites than these listed on this map. However, these are the ones that we've been able to prove through historical documents, oral histories, and archaeological surveys. I'm including this map because I think it's important to reiterate at every possible opportunity the vast territory that the people who are now known as Suquamish once held and cared for. Okay, not only did each tribe have their own creation story, but each village may have had their own version of the creation story, or a completely different or similar creation story. This is as accepted. I'm going to try to move these images out of the way. As accepted and understood as casually as sharing recipes is to other people. It is a respected and honored sharing of each other's beliefs or descriptions of events. No one's was more important than others. For people who are now known as Suquamish, I know of two different creation stories. These likely come from two separate villages. Again, that's why I included the map, so that, well, often people know about the Desaqua village site, also called Old Man House, and the huge structure that it was. And unfortunately, many people might think that that was our only village. And so that's why I included the map. So it's so important to know that we had so many villages. Okay. So there's a basic bottom line to both of these Suquamish creation stories. And just as we know that there's 32, 33 known village sites, there's probably many more creation Suquamish, so-called Suquamish creation stories. And I'll explain the so-called a little bit later. So there's a basic bottom line to both of the stories that I know. The Creator placed us here. The Creator gave us many gifts to feed, clothe, and house us. We have to do the work to make these gifts suit us. And we are grateful for the wonderful, rich, beautiful place that He chose for us. One of the stories has Creator populating the earth with many, many, many human people. There were too many human people. So the Creator changed some of them into plant people, animal people, rock people, the land, the sky, and all that surrounds us. And this is why we treat all the things around us with respect and honor, because they are in fact our brothers, our sisters, our ancestors, and our teachers. Another Suquamish creation story has the Creator creating human people last after creating everything else and putting everything else in place. And as He created us, He saw that we weren't listening to the original instructions like the other peoples were, and other peoples, plant people, rock people, animal people. So He asked the plant people and the animal people to help the human people. Now, this is just two little snippets of those two stories. These two different stories with very similar teachings: respect and honor of the others that surround us. Here in our lands and waters, there are vast and various gifts from the Creator that fulfill all our needs for food, medicine, clothing, and shelter. So much so that after doing all the necessary work to gather all that we need for the spring, summer, and fall, there was more than enough of resources and time for preservation for the winter. And still we had even more resources to make many, many gifts, and time to create works of art, elaborate utilitarian items, plenty enough extras to give away in ceremonies and celebration, and even more time for spiritual life, a complex governance system for the village, and for the uses of our natural gifts from the Creator. This is to say, we actually had a system of rotating our harvesting areas as to allow for rest and rebirth of an area and prevent over-harvesting of anything, clams, oysters, plants, what have you. Okay, so the reason why there's this talk today is because I mentioned in a previous event and conversation that, everybody says, Happy New Year, like right at December 31st and January 1st. And I continue to remind people that here, Native New Year begins when the frog people sing out the winter and sing in the spring. And so that was what brought Anne to say, please tell us that. Well, there's not much more to say about that. There's not a big story involved in that, and there wasn't a celebration. It was something, go ahead and next slide. This annual notice of the new year arriving was something that we looked forward to, though there was no big ceremony or celebration for the new year itself. It was just an important time, and the frog's song was eagerly anticipated. As I write this is just a few days ago. I mean, each different slide was written however long this, takes time. But as I wrote that paragraph just a few days ago, it said yesterday, Monday, February 21st, was the first time in my life that I remembered having snow, however little, arriving after the frogs started singing. This and many other indices are, I believe, more indicators of climate change. And that's a really sad thing for me. I have to say that my birthday is February 3rd, and I looked forward to snow for my birthday every year, and I almost every year got snow on my birthday. But not long after that, sometime in February, the frogs would start singing, and there wouldn't be any more snow after that. However, this year there was snow twice after that. And again, I worry about climate change. Back in the 70s and 80s, we, the Suquamish tribal community, did hold an annual Native American art fair at Native New Year time. And we did this was to support the Native artists and craftspeople after the expense of the winter. We held this event in the Suquamish Tribal Center Gymnasium on Sandy Hook Road. There were many local Native artists and tables full of their arts and crafts, and it was heavily advertised with beautiful posters made by tribal members, usually Peg Dean. And these posters became collectible over time. The posters were also made into t-shirts, and so the t-shirts are also collectible. There would be Native cooks selling Indian fry bread, Indian tacos, res dogs. Res dogs are fry bread wrapped around a hot dog that's deep fried, you know, all those anti-diabetic foods. And hamburger soup was also a favorite. These are all local favorites. Next slide. Although we stayed in and close to the winter longhouse in the coldest times of the year, we weren't bored. There were many things to do. Ceremonies and celebrations happened in the winter longhouse, not only in the winter longhouse, but especially in the winter longhouse. Gambling, also called bone game, also called salal, was as old as we are. There are stories of how the creator gave us this game. If you look at this photo, you might not know. If you could back up again. If you look at this photo, you might not know that this is not a longhouse that people lived in. There's a winter longhouse that people lived in, and then there was a smokehouse, different than a smokehouse that you smoke salmon in. A smokehouse is a longhouse, but it isn't lined on the walls with family compartments. It's open, and in their ceremonies and celebrations happened. And you might not realize by looking at this is a bone game or slahal, but I know because I see stacks of blankets in front of people, like stacks and stacks of blankets, and I see someone holding their arm out, and that means they're playing a bone game. In a bone game, there's sticks, there's discs, and there's bones that are one's carved and one's not, and the person, one person holds them in their hands, and they sing and they dance and they do things with their hands with the bones. They put it behind their back or under a blanket, and the person on the other side is supposed to guess by pointing with their arm which hand the person has the plain bone in, and then they hold it up and show which one they have. And in between them would be, in between the teams, there'd be teams of people. In between them would be all the things that were being gambled at that moment. And these games would go on for days and nights and days and nights. Next. Okay, in the winter season, it's spent in the winter longhouse, and the villagers spend this time, they have already spent spring, summer, and fall traveling all over the lands and waters to gather all the foods, the medicines to dry and smoke and put away for the winter season. They have gathered materials for clothing, baskets, tools, and all manner of utilitarian items. They have felled cedar trees to use for building and maintaining and repairing or adding onto the longhouse, and they have gathered cedar logs for planks and roofing and walls, and for canoes and canoe paddles. They have traded with other tribes and other villages for things not common in our own area, and the winter season is for making things and storytelling. So, so we see in the top photo, we see a woman making I would bet that that's a cattail mat that she's making. Cattail, the whole entire walls of the Longhouse were lined with layers and layers of cattail mats. Cattails are, they're soft, they're squishy, they're hollow once they're woven. And then the walls of the Longhouse are lined, fully lined with this. Then it's insulation. And then more are made for mattresses to sleep on and rolled up as pillows. Also, they're used in the bottoms of the canoes to keep your feet dry, because anybody, you know, who's from here and spends time in the water, especially in canoes or boats or kayaks or whatever, you know how important it is to keep your feet dry. Under her is some close-ups of some beautiful, stunningly beautiful dog wool blankets. I say dog wool because that's the major material. There's a certain dog called the Salish woolly dog, a little white breed. It's the only breed identified to the United States and actually bred and created by these Northwest Coast people from Alaska, west coast of Alaska and Canada, and what's now known as Canada, British Columbia, and Washington and Oregon. These tribes are all the ones who created this breed and kept this breed separate from other breeds. It's about a medium-sized, smallish to medium-sized, very fluffy, very white dog. Their white wool was combed out of them and cut out of them, and then mixed with other things like mountain goat wool, the fluff from fireweed plants, the fluff from cattail plants, and then dyed amazing, brilliant colors from things from our environment. So those blankets were really, really, really brightly, vibrantly colored. And you see in the next picture over to the right of that, you'll see people making and storing different things. So this was a really big picture in a book, and when it's made small, and my eyes are over 60 years old, so but things were often made and stored high up in the Longhouse and on platforms and in boxes, bentwood boxes and all that. And the largest picture is of a woman weaving on a loom. And if you notice to the left of the photo, on the photo, that's a baby in a cradle board. And you know that lullaby, that lullaby, rockabye baby, blah, 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 as the wind blows, the cradle will rock. That's about these people and this cradle, because the cradle would be hung like to a low branch. If they were outside, it would be hung to a low branch of a tree, and a string from there would be tied to the toe of the woman who's weaving, and she could just move her foot to rock the baby. And you got to be careful, because if the wind blows too much, the cradle will fall. So that's a little information for you. Next. Okay, these are things that can be done in the Longhouse in the wintertime. There's many, many, many kinds of baskets. That's a cradle basket on the top left. And then there's a burden basket. There's lots of kinds of burden baskets. There's kinds that you'd carry berries in, and roots and herbs and things that you're collecting. And then the bottom one is a clam basket. Clam baskets are open weave because you want to bring home the clams, but not all the sand and the water. Next. Things to do in the Longhouse in the winter. Weave dog wool into blankets, skirts, headbands, belts. Well, so the dog is extinct. Hudson's Bay and the other trading companies that had their blankets were not happy that natives didn't need their blankets. And so they put a price on the woolly dog's head, and trappers would get paid for every you know, proof of every woolly dog that they could kill. So we lost them, even though we cared for them and kept them separate and prized them highly, you know. But there is hope that we can bring that breed back, because it belongs in the Spitz family of dogs. And I have, like, for instance, I have 3 little Shiba Inus. There is a white breed of the Shiba Inu that looks very much like the Salish wool dog. And so there's hope that we can recreate this dog. That's my granddaughter, and she made her, she's now 18 and gonna graduate high school, but then she was like 9 or 10, and we still have looms and make skirts and capes and headbands and all, and belts and all that. And that was her with her first day of weaving Salish wool. And this is a cradle board. So it would be made out of a basket, but then the baby would be tied in there. There would be a small blanket underneath, and then there would be, and there might be like cedar bark that's been shredded and beaten, so it's very, very soft as a nest for the baby to lay on, and then the baby would be laced up in there. So there's things that were gathered all year round. Not a lot, but there would be. So, and why I put this in here is because when you're in the Longhouse in the winter, you really miss some fresh food, because almost everything you have has been smoke dried or air dried or what have you. And so these are some things that can be gathered year round. And why I say except is because currently we have biologists who tell us when to stop gathering, but pre-contact we knew when to not when to leave an area or a species alone to come back. So all these things we'd be able to gather year round, except when, like it says. So that's a lot of fresh food for the winter time, but not as much as we're used to. Next. Late winter, early spring, we would have smelt. There would be other fish, but particularly smelt and duck, bitterroot, nettle shoots, and coos root. And yeah, I don't know what that last one is, but there would be things that we could get still in the late winter. Now, I know duck soup is something that's I remember from my early childhood, and still it's pretty special. And smelt, okay, one of my favorite childhood memories is all 5 of us, of my mom and dad's kids, were in the back seat of the car. My dad was driving, and we stopped at a friend's house on Lamolo, and my dad went in to talk to the family, and when he came out, the gentleman who lived there came out with them, and they handed each one of us kids a stick right out of the smokehouse, and the stick had smelt, like, I don't know, 6 or 7 smelt dried on each stick, and they were handed to us like candy. And our goal was to open our mouth and put one whole smelt from the stick in our mouth and pull just the meat and leave the head and the spine on the stick. And that was what, you know, it was a candy to us. So smelt is and as we all know, or we should know, smelt is not something that comes in here like with the Puget Sound boiling like it used to, you know, meaning there was so many, you heard them coming and saw them coming. And it's just not like that anymore. Next. Spring, time to wake up the canoes. Now we do have a ceremony about this, and we've always had a ceremony about this. All of these various time too are indicated by the weather conditions, or the amount of sun, wind, rain, snow, or the indicator plants or indicator animals. The animal people, the plant people, they tell us, or the weather tells us when it is to go somewhere and what to do, you know, when to gather certain things. The native peoples are intimately aware of everything in our ecosystem. Everything is alive and everything has a time to be appreciated, asked for. May we use them? May we use it? Would be a prayer, it would be a song, it would be a ceremony. May we use you? And if you allow us, we will use you for food, or we'll use you for medicine, we'll use you for capes or skirts. Everything that is collected, harvested, dried, smoked, stored is asked politely with reverence and respect if we can use them. And it is with, and what we're using it for. So waking up the canoes, that's a time to get going, go places and do things and gather. Next. So this is my cousin Peg Deem with, I like to say, the voice of Suquamish. She's always got the most beautiful voice, and she's on the waterfront. She's there when it's time to wake up the canoes, or when to put the canoes to bed, or when it's time to gather, when people are gathering, you know, she's welcomes them in. Her daughter, Kate Avicana, has that same amazing voice. Other people do sing, but I just thought this picture really said it all. Time to go out and gather, spring, summer, and fall. Go far and gather much. The next slide. Okay, here's the map. Now, the red lines are the outline of the reservation as it currently is. All those yellow dots are places that we know are Suquamish gathering spots, and all the numbered ones are known villages, and that means the Longhouse was there, or more than one. A usual village had, you know, 3, 6 longhouses. Each longhouse had a leader, and each village had a leader. There's 33 numbered on there. And as far north as South Whidbey Island. And I want to say as far south as Olalla. As you'll notice, we had villages and campsites on the Olympic Peninsula, the Kitsap Peninsula, Bainbridge Island, and what's known as the Seattle waterfront. Again, Whidbey Island, let's not forget that. The person who had a village on Whidbey Island, his name was Chief Chalicum. He was more famous in his time than Chief Seattle in his time. There's just, he's a lesser known to the non-Indians than he is to us, but he's well known to us, Chief Chalicum. Chief Chalicum had more than one village, more than one winter village, and he was well traveled. Even the non-Indians trusted Chief Chalicum to transport their mail. So the US mail was handed to Chief Chalicum, and he would bring it from, you know, one military post to another, or one non-Indian village to another. That's how trusted and well-known he was. Again, his name was Chief Chalicum. He had a village on South Whidbey Island and on Foulweather Bluff, or Point No Point. Next. Okay, this is what the campsites would look like. And so the cattail mats are what this tent is created out of, and they would be you know, small, and sometimes it would take the planks, not sometimes. When the longhouse in the spring was, when people left the longhouse in the spring, almost every single person would leave the longhouse. There may be some very old people or very sick people who couldn't travel, so there would be people that stayed back with them to take care of them. And for that reason, almost every roof plank and house plank would be taken from the longhouse, so it would just look like a skeleton. you know, would just have the uprights and the beams, unless there was people that needed to stay there. Those planks would be taken and the cattail mats and erected into these tent structures. When gathering was abundant, which it always was, they would put two canoes together side by side and put planks across, fill the bottom of the canoe with things that they had gathered, put planks across both canoes and fill and pile that up with baskets and bentwood boxes full of things that they were collecting, and then travel to the next site and next site. So they could be coming home with side-by-side canoes, sets and sets and sets of side-by-side canoes with the planks, with the baskets and the boxes, just full of all the things that they gathered to get through the winter in the Longhouse. Okay, so late spring, early summer is time for fresh, you know, fire baked salmon, and nothing better than salmon cooked outside. There's different kinds: Chinook, pink salmon, herring spawn. Do you guys know what herring spawn is? It's herring eggs that are on seaweed. So that would be gathered too. And still today, that would be a delicacy. Clams and other shellfish, plants, camas, bulbs of all kinds, salmonberry sprouts, the sprouts of new green plants of many different kinds. Oh, and seaweed. In here, I'm going to recommend a couple books because they go into detail about all the different, like it would be this PowerPoint presentation to a book extent. And for instance, I believe there's 40 different kinds of seaweed that our people would regularly gather. 40. Some of it looked like popcorn. Some of when prepared, some of it would other food would be wrapped in it and baked in it. Other seaweed would be pickled, like sliced up and pickled. And okay, then all the berries, all the many early berries. So seaweed is a very packed with nutrients, minerals and nutrients plant that was for us. Now, right now in the Puget Sound is not a place to gather seaweed of any kind for any kind of human use. It's just too dirty. It's just too dirty. Any gathering of seaweed is now done up on with permission of our neighboring tribes up there on the Strait of Juan de Fuca. And I've been to a couple of these gatherings, and then the all day of preparing these different seaweeds into all this amazing kind of food. And oh my gosh, it's like when you go through one of those experiences, you know that how much you're missing out on everything that was abundant here. Okay, having fresh spring salmon baked over a fire is necessary to feed the Indian soul after the winter time in the Longhouse. Now, this photo is one of my favorites. On the far left is my dad, Chuck Lawrence, tall, handsome, hilariously funny guy. He, after the war, after tuberculosis, after all that, he survived. He was able to, well, like I said in another story, he had to get a lawyer to fight for his GI benefits because it wasn't assumed that any people of color were going to benefit from the GI benefits, from the GI Bill. But with the help of a lawyer, he was able to get his GI Bill benefits and go to school. And he got in 2 years, got a 4-year electrical engineering degree, and he went straight to work at Keyport. He was a boss of a shop of like 30 women over there, and who were doing the small, intricate wiring inside the torpedoes. And next to him is Ben George, and in front of Ben is my Auntie Dode. She's non-Indian, married to the next man over, which is Lyle George. Next to Lyle is Martha George. She's the mother of the two, Ben George and Lyle George. And next to her is her husband. She is Suquamish, and her husband was from Port Gamble. And the last person on the right is Ruby George, who is married to Ben, who's the one standing by my dad. And at Keyport, they had a spring family picnic. My dad got put in charge of that. And of course, he made it into a big salmon bake and clam bake and all that. And even after my dad passed away, it carried on for many years. And I don't know if it's still going on, but I had to include that because a lot of these traditions and most of these traditions are still carried on as best we can today. In the spring and summer, when the dogwood tree blooms is when we gather cedar bark. And if you walk up and touch a cedar tree, you're touching the outer bark. When we pull that bark off the tree, we separate the outer bark from the inner bark, and we leave the outer bark at the base of the tree that we pulled it off of. And, you know, we, of course, ask the tree, and then there's all kinds of rules about what size a tree, how old the tree. When you look up and down the tree, what looks like it's going to give you plenty of cedar bark without too many limbs. Pulling off the north side or the south side, and then, or if you're going to take the tree for use of a canoe or cedar planks for the house or whatever, then you can take all the bark. But if you're not going to take the whole tree, then you only take one strip of cedar off that tree. Next. Okay, here's 3 books that I want you to know about. Wild Rose and Western Red Cedar, Gifts from the Northwest Plants, and that's Elise Krohn, K-R-O-H-N. And then Feeding the People, Feeding the Spirit, and that's Elise Krohn and Valerie Segrest. Valerie Segrest is a Muckleshoot tribal member. And so both of those books are full of information. The bottom one is got lots of recipes. And the best book I've seen in decades about Northwest Coast people or Coast Salish people is People of Cascadia by Heidi Bowen. Not only is it well written and well researched and very user friendly to flip through and look for what topic you're looking for, but the illustrations are extraordinary. And I'm going to give you a sampling of that, but you're going to want to include People of Cascadia in your personal library. Oh, and the picture of the plant, that is, some people call it Labrador tea, we call it marsh tea. And we would gather this plant from the marshy areas that they have to have a mix of moving salt water and marshy area, but not just a marsh. If it's just a marsh, it's not going to taste good. It's not going to have all the medicines you want. But as long as there's moving salt water and the marsh, then this is going to be something. This is a place that you could gather marsh tea. And marsh tea is one of the first plants I was ever brought out when I was a kid to gather. Okay, now here's that book that I want you to pay attention to. People of Cascadia, Pacific Northwest Native American History. The cover is an illustration by Bill Holm. Oh, we recently lost him. And when I say recently, I don't know, you can Google and find out the last 5 years or whatever, but sometimes I liken this to when John Wayne died. When John Wayne died, non-Indians were like, how can that be possible? How can he even die? Well, to us, there's people like this, you know, Bill Holm, who was non-Indian, but he loved natives so completely and so gently. I guess, I mean, what I want to say is there's a lot of people that, while it was illegal for us to continue our culture, then there was non-Indians who were paid to study and practice our culture while we were prohibited. And we were prohibited all the way to 1978. 1978, not 18, 1978 was against the law for us anywhere in the United States to have native religion, native ceremony, native language, native anything. And non-Indians were paid to collect it, practice it, study it, teach it, gather it, you know, but it was against the law for us. Some of these people that did this, some of the non-Indians that did this were doing it for their own, you know, to raise themselves up. Some of them were doing it because they hoped that they were saving it for us. And that's Bill Holm. That's one of those people. Dwayne Pascoe's another who, and the, you know, the list goes on. There is a handful of those people who did it for us to benefit us. Next. Okay, so there's going to be several pages from this book, and this is what I'm saying, that we made many scientific and technology proven items, science-based technologically proven items that we used in our culture for thousands of years that still stand the test of time. So we had nets of all shapes and sizes to capture fish, and we had net gauges, stones that we would carve and shape to the right size to be so that every one of those spaces in the net was a specific size for a specific species used at a certain time and place. And all those gauges would be kept and known. Then there would be weights for the bottom of the nets, floats for the top of the nets. There would be dip nets and bag nets. There would be nets woven out of limbs, cedar limbs and roots that would be like fixed. It wouldn't move, you know, almost like a cage. That would be drugged behind two canoes to gather fish. But these nets would be, remember that cedar bark? Cedar bark that would be shredded and beaten and soaked in water and made malleable, and then the fibers would be woven into twine and rope, and then the twine would be brought around those net gauges to make. So I mean, it's extraordinary, tedious and hard work that would be done in the winter time, when you had all that time inside the Longhouse. So all this stuff, I mean, the difference between a contemporary gill net and a pre-contact gill net is just the material. That's all. Next. So the saltwater shoreline gave us many, many, many gifts. And so there would be the waterfowl. Again, there is tall poles that would be stood up near a village. And at the right time of the year, when it's foggy in the morning, nets would be put up on those tall poles. And then people would go out in canoes and scare the ducks into the nets, and then bring the nets down, and then there'd be lots of duck soup for a while. Then here's all these, again, these important plants from the shoreline. So many different kinds used for so many things. And we did eat seals and porpoise. We did. There's still lots of porpoise out there. You can see them every morning if you're just looking around. We would that would be for a whole village. Lots of people would eat for quite a while on those things. And then all that seaweed was used for something, all of it. Next. So this is seasonal gifts, and I love her illustrations in this book. 'It goes from late fall, early winter with chum and, you know, and then spring, summer, fall, winter, and spring. And then it goes into the fall, winter, and then spring, summer, 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 fall, winter, and then spring, And Suquamish people didn't have a river, so there would be people who a lot of natives would be placed right by a river, and or they might have more than one river in their territory, and so salmon would come to them on certain runs. But Suquamish, we didn't have a river. We had the entire Puget Sound and Strait of Juan de Fuca and you know, the San Juan Islands area, all that. We would travel far to chase the fish, to catch the fish, to smoke the salmon, to or whatever fish. There was also halibut and you know, all the many different kinds of fish that we would be collecting out there. And then all the plants, all the roots and all the berries and, you know, the nuts. There's not a lot of nuts, but there are some. We grew up with a hazelnut tree in our backyard, and that was something that was used and collected and processed. Camas is another root. Now, remember I talked about Chalicum? Chief Chalicum at his village that's on the south end of Whidbey Island had a huge camas plantation. It's not kind of, it's something that would be naturally growing there that would be protected from being overgrown by anything else. So it might be burned, the meadow might be, or valley might be burned of other things that would encroach and hurt the camas field. So there was some of that, but it wouldn't be like in rows. There wouldn't be plantings in rows like non-Indians do. There would be where it was, and then you protect it the way it is, the way it wants to be. We did eat bear. That's one of my, I remember I was like, I don't know, 10 or 11, and we were at somebody's wedding, and it was that building that went back when the ferry dock, when the ferry did stop in Suquamish, there was a white building that was on the ferry dock. That was the ticket takers building. And then when there was no longer ferry, they moved that building off the dock and onto the land. And that building was, for a while, it was the Pie and I restaurant. For a while, it was different things. It became the place, it was a summer school for several summers for the Suquamish tribe. It was the Legion Hall. And most of the Legionnaires in Suquamish, or in that area, were native, but also non-native. So the Legionnaires were the ones of post 60 were the ones that, with my dad as chairman of the tribe and a Legionnaire, brought back Chief Seattle Days in 1962. Well, in that building, when I was like 10 or 11 was the first time I remember having bear, and it was somebody's wedding in that building. And I remember it tasted really good, but was also very, very greasy, but not greasy in a bad way. I don't know how else to describe that. Very oily and flavorful. And rabbit, I also remember eating rabbit almost daily when we were growing up. Next. Okay, the top of it says Western Red Cedar, Tree of Life, and this just gives you, and you know, when you talk about the gifts from the Creator, this one species gave us so much. It gave us things to make our home. It gave us clothing. It gave us sun hats. It gave us cedar bark mats. Now the cedar bark mats are different from the cattail mats. The cedar bark mats are something that you sat on it was more stiff and rigid, and you could put more art in it. You could, you know, dye the cedar strips different colors and then weave designs in it. And it was something that you would sit on as opposed to sleep on. It wasn't soft. It was like, here's your place, stay on your place. Rope and twine, the planks, the burden baskets down at the bottom. It says baskets and it has a couple different ones. The burden baskets, one of my favorite ones to make, because you can make it in 15 minutes once you have it ready to go. And then burden baskets, there's little necklaces that are made of burden baskets, and they give these out to people when they're somebody who works too hard, to remind them to set down their burden. If they've been carrying a burden too long, too hard, it's a reminder to say, even the people that carried burden baskets knew when to take their burden off and set it down. So that's anybody you might know that might need a burden basket necklace to say, slow down, take your burden off. Yeah, it gave us so much. Next. Okay, this is in here because we, the Suquamish people, did not carve totem poles, but we did carve house posts and memorial poles and story poles. And there's a difference between them all. And that's, again, one of the reasons I really like her book, is because she went from village to village, tribe by tribe, area to area, and defined the differences between these. So whenever you see a carving, don't just call it a totem pole. If it's like a single figure, it may be a memorial pole, like my dad's memorial pole, or it may be a house post. Usually a house post is inside a house. It might be standing outside a house, but the uprights that are holding up the longhouse, those would usually be carved by and about the people whose section of the house that is. There would always be two main ones, a main woman and a main man house post set, that indicate that those people in that section are the leaders of that longhouse. Different than a totem pole. Totem poles are really from what's now called Alaska and northern Canada. Next. Okay, back to the indicator plants and indicator animals, but there's also indicator weather events. Many indicator plants, animals, and indicator weather events, these are based in science and remembered in stories. I keep saying science because our people lived so close to the ground, so close to the water, so close to the environment, that we knew everything about everything there. And anybody today that's called that is usually called a scientist of some kind, a biologist, just think of all those specialties. And our people, when you spend thousands and thousands of years with one environment and you are dependent on that environment, then you get to know it all completely, every salamander, you know. But like I say, these are based in science and remembered in stories. So when the dogwood flowers, May, June, July, August, it's the time to harvest the cedar bark. And the cedar bark gathering season can be extended as you travel farther up towards the mountains. When the tide is at its lowest, don't walk on the beach alone. What's that about? There's a story called I Know, and I doubt that, I'm looking for the clock. I doubt that I have the 15 extra minutes to tell you that story, but I will promise to tell you the story of I Know, because it's perfect for teenagers. It's perfect for middle school kids or some high school kids, even some grade school kids. It's perfect for elders to teach young people I know, because there was this little crow who asked all the questions, but while the fisherman or the carver or the fisherman or the hunter, the leader, was trying to answer those questions to the young crow, the crow would interrupt and say, oh, I know. Oh, I know. Well, on this one day where the tide was at its lowest all year, when they would get interrupted by little young crow who wants to know but then says I know, they would say, and as he's leaving, don't go out on the beach by yourself. Don't go, I know you like hopping on boulders, don't go hop on those boulders way out there. because the tide is way out and the devilfish is out. Whenever the tide is that low, the devilfish is out. Oh, I know. And then he finds out for sure how to know because he doesn't listen. So I'll tell you that story at another event when we have a good 15, 20 minutes for just that story. There's a small plant that's a very, very powerful, tiny plant that's very powerful. And this is one of those bodily functions stories that kids giggle about. And it's called Coyote and Rock. Also deserves its own 15, 20 minutes. And when the frogs sing out the winter and sing in the spring, there's so many of these indicator plants, indicator animals, indicator weather events that are known by our people through science, but remembered in story. Okay, I came across this sign and I just had to keep it. The Handshake Agreement of 1932 reserves the picking of huckleberries on this side of the road for Indians. I just thought, you know, you don't get to see those kind of signs very often. You can go on. Oh, berries, berries, berries. Okay, there was a few things that were like candy to us, but berries, oh my gosh. And we would eat them fresh, but mostly these berries would be dried and made into cakes, like dried, like pemmican. If any of you know what pemmican is, it's something that you could keep for a long time and then bring a little chunk with you when you're out doing hard work, and you can it'll give you lots of energy, lots of sustenance for while you're doing your hard work, but it's small. So that's how most of our berries were eaten. Go ahead. We enjoyed cranberries, salmon berries, wild strawberries, huckleberries, service berries, halal berries, currant berries, choke cherry, choke berries, elderberries, Pacific crab apples. This reminds me of another story, but so many berries, the candy of our ancestors. There's one that I didn't include in here. I couldn't find a picture of it, so but I'm going to tell you about it. It's called Soapberry. It's a white berry on a bush, and unlike these other ones, and I haven't asked one of our biologists why this is true, but these berries, all these other berries are out there. You can see them just as buds. You can see them when they're still green. You can see them when their color, whatever their color is going to be, black or red or orange or whatever. And then they, you know, if you don't get them, the birds do, and they're gone, you know, in a very limited amount of time. But the soapberry, it's around for a long months and months and months and months. And so I don't know why it's different. I don't know why it's different than all the others, but our people would collect the soapberry and then use an ironwood branch. I don't know why, but an ironwood branch, and whip the soapberry into this froth. And that's called Indian ice cream. Indian ice cream had its own spoon. Unlike like every person, and I think it's later in here, every person, every man, woman, and child had their own spoon that they'd wear on a belt around their waist. Every day they had their spoon with them. Their spoon was made in such a way that it would be like a spoon to get just a serving out of a basket of soup that was made, or it could be a bowl, or it could be a plate to get clams out of the clam pit, or have a piece of salmon on. So your spoon was your spoon, your bowl, your cup, your plate, all of those things, and you wouldn't forget it. You'd wear it. But the soapberry, the Indian ice cream, had its own spoon, which was really, really long and gently curved and beautifully ornate. And it was unlike any, as soon as anybody in our culture sees that, we know that's a Indian ice cream spoon. So like dessert, special dessert. Now, when the first time I had Indian ice cream, I did not like it. It was like a bitter froth. We would mix fresh berries with it, fresh, any one of these berries that is around, to make it sweeter for kids. Next. So berries and other fruits were enjoyed fresh, dried, mashed, made into fruit leather, or made into something like pemmican. Hazelnuts, nuts, hazelnuts, and acorns were harvested in the late summer and fall, and as were roots and bulbs. Soups were made out of roots and bulbs. Fresh or dried meats were added to the soup. The type of meat would be whichever was available at the time. Next. And these are all things available in the late summer, early fall. Next. Spoons, like this is what I was just telling you. These, everybody had their own spoon, and it could be small for like little children, toddlers, or big for adults. They were utilitarian and they were decorative. Remember all that spare time we had? Because we have so much things here to gather that if you do the work to gather and preserve it, then you have all this time to make utilitarian things beautiful. Now here I say you will need to go look in the Suquamish Museum and at Kayana Lodge in the display cases for the many beautiful spoon examples. So I'm asking you to do some work. Spoons were very, very important and very personal. They would, every single one of them have a hole in the handle. That's what you put your cedar twine through to wear as a belt around your, it wasn't a belt, it was worn around your waist because you never want to be without it. It wouldn't, I've never saw anybody wearing one around their neck. I don't know why you didn't, you don't want to get choked on a branch or something, but it would be worn around the waist, and they're gorgeous, gorgeous spoons. Late fall, early winter, different fish, different plants, different animals. And time to put away the canoes. There becomes that time when the wind, the waves, and the cold are just too powerful to have a safe travels by canoe, and this is the time to put away the canoes. There's many more times of the year that I wasn't able to put in here. Every time I get ready to send this to read, to get ready for this, it tells me too big, too many, so I had to cut. And I had to keep cutting until it said that was okay. So some of the things got cut out. There's many different times of the year that have a name like this. Also, we have a song that is a lullaby. It has a story about a Kaya, which is grandmother, and her grandchildren were traveling in a canoe, and they were going from one village to the next. And the weather changed as they were out there and caused the children to be afraid. The Kaya tells the children to think good thoughts and listen to her, and she sings a song that speaks to their home waters, their home village, and their journey to arrive safely. Some Suquamish people sing this song to their babies the minute they're born. And we believe our babies arrive from the spirit world, and when we leave this world, we go to that same spirit world. So we also, some of us will also sing the same song to our people who are on their journey back to the spirit world. It's again a lullaby, but it's about traveling safely to that next destination. So whether it's okay, we're going to be safe in this canoe in bad weather, or you just arrived from your journey, welcome, or you're on your last journey from here, not your last journey, because we believe in, our people pre-contact believed in reincarnation. Absolutely, it was a known thing. And so that was interrupted by Catholicism. And so you can ask, 30 Suquamish people, and maybe one of them is going to remember that we had this before contact with the invaders. And here's the map one more time, because I want to make it clear that we didn't just have one village. We didn't just have 33 villages. We had many more that we haven't yet uncovered through archaeological survey. A lot of oral history is, we have what we have, and how do we get more from our ancestors who are gone? You don't. So another way is through archaeological survey. And our people believe that if you could prevent this disturbing a place, then don't do it. But if we have to, because of like that road's going to be built anyway, no matter what we do, then that's a time for rescue archaeology. When you rescue what's going to be disturbed and get everything you can out of it. Like when Port Orchard built their new city hall, what was uncovered was a ancient Suquamish village site. So there was a bunch of rescue archaeology done at that time. And I have pictures of me and my youngest daughter and a granddaughter in my arms, my youngest daughter standing beside me, and we're in the trench of that, what was going to be the new Port Orchard City Hall. And here's these, you know, and you look at, when you get to look at the ground sliced straight down and you see the different layers, you see when that Crater Lake in Oregon that used to be a mountain that became a volcano, you see when that ash was put down, you see that layer, and you see Mount St. Helens layer, and you see all these other known volcano events. And also you see where a village was burned to the ground. Now that's highly likely an invasion from the northern tribes. And you see when it's been rebuilt, when the village has been rebuilt, maybe a lot of time went by before they rebuilt on that place. But what this is to say is, oh, and then there was an event. There was a huge singular event that affected the dropping. I wish I had Dennis Lewert here, our archaeologist. There was a time when the waterfront dropped. And when that did, any village that we're going to find now is pretty much going to be underwater by a lot. And so even we have this superimposed old man house on top of the current site where it was, and we know exactly where the posts are because they still, the beams are still in the ground, or the uprights are still in the ground where when the Indian agent and the US Army burned that longhouse to the ground, well, it stopped at the sand. The fire stopped at the sand. So in the ground still is the main beams. So we know from GPS locations where every single one of those are. And so at its longest in history, because it grew over time, as the population grew, it grew. So it was almost 900 feet long at the time that the Army burned it to the ground. And so we can superimpose a longhouse on top of those beams on that location. And what that tells us when we do it is that there's no place to park the canoes in front of the longhouse where the high tide wouldn't take them. And so we wouldn't locate a longhouse without a place for all the many canoes to be safely on land. So that tells us while the longhouse still could sit there, it wouldn't be the perfect place for what else a village has, which is all the area that you need that would be sand for, that the water wouldn't come up on, for all the things that you do, not just parking the canoes, but all the activity that would be happening outside. You can't just pull the 80 canoes up to the front door of the longhouse, tie them to the house. You need space. And so so that there are so many indicators of the scientific events that happen. And so any more archaeology is going to be underwater or wet site archaeology. Again, I know I probably went over the hour. I don't see a clock, but there you go. There is the seasonal rounds of the Suquamish people, and get that book because you're going to be thrilled. The People of Cascadia by Heidi Bowen.
Oh, Barbara, thank you so much. I have made some notes about what we're going to ask you for stories. I think let's have a story session next time, and you can save up and tell us some wonderful stories, because it's so tantalizing to hear that there's so much more. And yes, we're going to definitely get those books It's interesting, some of us have been reading or listening to Robin Wall Kimmerer, the Braiding Sweetgrass writer, about some similar things, and people got really, really intrigued and interested. And so this is like a perfect follow-up, because it really is like, this is how people lived here, right here in this land where we are squatting, essentially. But so beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Always appreciate your insights and your history and your stories and great pictures. So thank you so much.
Thank you.